Okay, so when you've got your own business, there comes a point where you can't do it all on your own, and you're looking at recruiting people. And the first thing that you think about is the other things that are happening right now in your business. What do I need help with? What am I going to do? So that's a good starting point. But if you're really busy, really rushed, really frantic, it's not the right time to recruit. So you need to think about what you're going to achieve from actually employing somebody. Before you even look at employing staff, you need to really think about your business. How are they going to add value to your business? And and the other part of it actually is, how are you going to make that job rewarding for the person that's coming in? Because it is a two-way relationship. So you need to think about both of those things. It's very easy to think about what you're going to get, what outcomes they might need to achieve for you, but actually, what are they going to gain by coming to work for you is an important part of it as well. Because when you put that investment into bringing people on board, that's the point where they're going to start expecting something back, and you don't want to put all that time and energy in and then not get anything back. So how will they add value? What are your current needs? Why do you need someone in your business? How might that change and grow over time? And as I said, the really important bit is, what are they getting out of it as well, other than just a paycheck? When a couple's running a business and the marriage and the communication is solid, it can truck along really, really well. Um, if something goes wrong in the relationship or the communication, you need to be prepared right at the beginning for what actually happens. It's a bit like when you perhaps meet someone later in life and you've got all different assets and things. How are you going to deal with that if something doesn't go how you hope it will? You sort of got to think about that when you set up a business as well, because couples often go into businesses without a prenup, for want of a better word, and it does matter. If you ever get to that point, it matters really big, but it can also help you prevent actually getting to that point, because often a couple, they have a balance between what they're great at and what they're not so great at. So again, clarifying your roles in the business. It's just, this is where I think earlier I said the job descriptions really, really matter. Here's another example where the job description can be so, so helpful. So if you've both got clear roles in the business and clear outcomes to achieve, it gets a lot less blurry and there's a lot less opportunity for conflict. And again, that applies to everybody, but way more important for a married couple. It also creates clarity for the people that work around you. So as your business grows and you employ people, they're like, well, I don't even know who's in charge. And they play you off against each other. You know, he's really soft and she's really hard. So when I want something, I'm going to go to him, not to her. When it's actually, where is the reporting line? Is it clear? So those kind of things are major, major traps. And it's also really important that you don't bring all your emotional baggage into work. We all have it. Every relationship has those times. What's going to happen if that starts overflowing into work is that the focus is no longer on running the business and getting the results. It's the business goes the same direction that the relationship's going in, and that's not necessarily where the business needs to be going. It depends on what you need. If you employ someone, there are actually a range of different employment agreements that you could consider. Um, when you actually put someone on an individual employment agreement, they work for you. And so they're expecting regular work, regular tasks. You'll have things perhaps that are quite repetitive and that need doing on a cyclical or regular basis. If you're thinking about some work that maybe isn't quite so regular, that needs particularly specialised skills, or someone who doesn't always have to show up, you might want to consider a contractor, keeping in mind they actually work for themselves, not just for you. So you can't always direct them quite the same way as an employee. You have much more management control when you employ someone under an employment agreement. And the other thing you need to think about is, there are different tax obligations, there are different rules and regulations. You have a lot less obligations to a contractor and they to you. So it's thinking about what the work looks like and how you think it might be best structured for your business. It is sometimes difficult to define both contractor and casual arrangements. And you do have to be careful, because what can happen is that somebody can come back at you and say, actually, you were telling me what to do. I had to show up on X days a week, and I was actually employed by you, and they can come back at you through an employment court for extra wages, leave, a whole lot of entitlements and compensations. So you do need to be careful. That's one of the points where you might want to get some good advice about what it should look like. And in particular, if it evolves over time, it might start out as a genuine casual contractor. If you've got someone on that arrangement, review it regularly. This one's very similar to being a family business, for example. So employing family and friends, or even just having a family business, have similar issues that you need to be aware of. The really first most obvious thing is that other staff know that they're not family or friends. And so there's this disconnect. And anything that they don't achieve won't be about their performance. It'll be about the fact that they're not family and friends. So it becomes quite hard to manage performance of the rest of the team. But the other thing that can go wrong, if you employ someone that you know, and things are going on in their life, or they're not coping with the job, and you've got to be the person to give them that feedback, there's real risks around either you're going to avoid it, or you're actually going to have to deal with it for your business to stay alive, and you'll lose that family member or friend in terms of the social connections. There's an upside. They're often very connected to you. They actually care about what happens to you. It can work. The really important bit is how you set it up at the beginning, because family businesses exist, and some of the work I do is helping people manage the downside of that, and there always is a downside. You can't avoid it when there's a bigger team. But the benefits are, they actually, as I said, they really do care. And so set up you with clarity. That's where your job description comes in. Do they actually know what they're employed to do? Do they know what outcomes they need to achieve? And plan ahead for how you will deal with challenges right at the beginning. You know, there's a chance, Bill, that you know, we're great mates, that something might go wrong, and we're going to have a conversation about that. Let's talk now about how we're going to do that and how we're going to separate work and personal stuff. So setting the parameters up early, that really matters. It matters for everyone, matters way more for someone that you don't want to lose. An employment agreement is basically just a written document that outlines the obligations of the employer and the employee in the employment relationship. Sounds pretty simple, but it's actually very highly legislated. There are very clear rules about what you must have in it, and what some of the things are that you can't have in it. It must include things like hours and place of work and leave, pay rates, a whole lot of things, too many to list. So you do need to be aware of what all the legislation requirements are. They also change over time, so you do need to be thinking about getting this document right. You can't sort of have a template from 5 years ago and assume that it's okay, because the law changes regularly. The employment agreement includes the job description as well, so it actually defines in quite detail those obligations. So it creates something for you that you can use to be very clear about who can and can't do what in the employment relationship, and it documents the legal expectations at the same time. But it gives you something to go back to if you're having problems, or if there's questions or there's doubts about anything that you have agreed. Then you go back, and you need to think about your requirements at the beginning again, and how they might change over time, and keep some things as flexible as you reasonably can within the law. So it's another area where you can just go through a checklist online, but you may want some advice as you make decisions going through that document. So a job description is quite simply a document that defines the role that you're employing someone into. And I think one of my biggest learnings in helping businesses with human resource issues is just how important a job description actually is. When I worked in HR jobs before, we always had job descriptions, so you couldn't see the impact of not having one. In a small business, it may not be something that you've naturally thought to put a lot of time and energy into, but please do. The job description looks at the tasks, and it looks at, if we get it really right, the communication, the critical parts of the communication and the outcomes that have to be achieved. You can talk about the energy and the attitude that someone wants to bring. You list all the skills and experience that matter. So there's your base to get your recruitment spot on straight away. But it's also a base for if something's not going right, something isn't going right, the person just isn't quite where you need them to be, and you're trying to work it out. And if you want to define when something's not working out, you have to get that right. Because if it ends up that you coach them and they improve, great. But if you coach them and it continues to deteriorate or stays at an inadequate level, you need some structure, you need something to refer back to that is evidence-based, and your job description is amazing for that. So sometimes a person hasn't been trained very well. So if you look at the job description and you go through the tasks and they say, well, I didn't even know I was meant to do that, or no one showed me how, or so it gives you a tool to have a conversation, to measure performance against, to get someone really well ingrained in the job. It's the one bit of HR that makes a difference in pretty much every aspect of getting your business and your staffing right. Workplace policies are the things that are not as defined as in an employment agreement, and an employment agreement is quite hard to change. Policies a little bit easier to change, but these are the things that help a person know how to get things done around your workplace. It might include how to apply for leave, or fill in a timesheet, or complete some particular operation in the organisation, but most importantly, it's got to have health and safety in it. That is the big one in your policies and procedures. You really have to get that right. You have to evidence that health and safety is a priority in a whole lot of ways. So that's a really big one. It sort of sits slightly to the side of general policies and procedures, but one that you mustn't forget. Okay, so the 90-day trial is different to how it used to be when it was first brought in. Now you can only utilise a 90-day trial period if you have 19 or less staff. And that is a little bit confusing for people to start with, because the 19 or less is at the time that you appoint a person. So one of the things that can happen, there are companies that might have half a dozen to 12 core staff and then employ seasonal staff. If you want to stay making offers with the trial period in it, you have 19 or less on the day of offer, so you offer all your seasonal people on the same day. So that's a wee tip around that. But the 90-day trial period means that you can actually terminate someone's employment in the first 90 days without having a reason stated as to why. So that just means that if something just isn't working out, you don't have to go through that same process that you normally have to go through to manage someone out. But don't get caught out. There are some rules. So the 90-day period does have rules. The agreement must be signed before the person starts. You have to respect the notice period and pay that out. That's in that 90-day period or in the termination clause. Sometimes they're different. So you do have to think about it. Again, it doesn't totally simplify being able to terminate someone, but it does make it a little bit less onerous. If ever you're looking at terminating anyone, whether it's a 90-day clause or anyone else, get the right advice. It's the one time where you don't want to try and do something without it. If you have 20 or more staff, then you're not able to put a trial period in your agreements, but you can actually use a probationary period. The process for terminating someone isn't as simple, but it does make it actually very clear that there will be checks made on the performance along the way and regular feedback, which of course you have to stick to. And whichever one of those probationary or trial periods that you use, you cannot do anything that's outside of human rights, again, because either one you can have a grievance taken against you. The really important thing to avoid something going wrong is probably a more important focus than what can go wrong, because you can have personal grievances, you can have people leave unexpectedly, you can have someone in the work environment who's being unkind, harassing, bullying. The things that can go wrong in myriad, they might not be very good at doing their job. So the best medicine is prevention. It's making sure that you do go through a good process, that you get the right people, and that you actually support them well when you bring them on board. Are they getting enough training? Have they got the resources that they need? Are you communicating with them regularly about their performance? Do they know when they're getting it right and when they're getting it wrong? So a whole lot can go wrong. It can be a personal thing, it can be a work thing. You've really got to think about yourself as a manager once you bring staff into your business. It's not enough anymore to focus on being great at what you do. Because if you've got a business that's grown to the point where you can employ people, chances are you're really, really good at what you do. Now you've got to make this shift and get really, really good at managing other people and getting the best out of them. So the biggest thing that goes wrong is you bring the worst out of people rather than the best out of them.